Today we are going to be preparing apples to go into any type of apple desserts, whether it's an apple pie, Tarte Tatin, any type of apple dessert. Basically the way I peel the apples is always going to be somewhat the same. I use a paring knife and a Parisienne scoop to take out the seeds. It makes it a little bit easier. But to remove the top and the bottom, if you just turn the apple, comes right off. Nice sharp knife. And all I'm doing is just turning the apple. If the knife is sharp, it'll cut right into the skin, go right through it very simply, or very easily. Okay, now to remove the rest of the skin off an apple, you can use an apple peeler, or you can use any type of peeler that you want. I've always found it a little bit faster and easier for me to do it with a knife. And the way I do that is basically I take the knife and I have 3 fingers on the handle. I put 1 finger on the top of the actual blade itself, and I do a method that they normally do in the kitchen when they're actually turning any type of vegetable, but that same motion you can use to actually peel apples. So I've got my thumb on the back part of the apple. As long as your knife is sharp, it'll go right through there, and that same motion that you're doing with this is the same motion that you use when you're turning potatoes, carrots, or any type of vegetable in the kitchen. And I always found it easier to have the smaller part or the thinner part of the apple at the bottom and come towards the larger part of the apple. It seems to make it easier to peel that way. You just keep peeling them down. Now, since these are Granny Smith apples, generally speaking, Granny Smith apples, they're not going to brown like a lot of the Red Delicious apples do, or some of the Delicious apples do. These will actually stay nice and white, so putting lemon juice on them at this time is not always necessary. Usually when you need the lemon juice is going to be when you start cutting into the seeds. It starts turning brown around the seeds first, and it works its way out towards the outside. But since we're making an apple pie filling today, I'm going to be cooking these pretty much so right away. They're not really going to have a chance to turn brown on us. Or if they do, that's okay, because there's cinnamon in the recipe, and that's just going to turn them brown anyway, so everything should be alright. It'll be beautiful either way. Okay. Cut all the apples in half. Now there's lots of different ways to remove the seeds. The Parisienne scoop just seems to work really well for removing the seed pod from the center of the apples. And if you're cutting any apples up for any type of apple dessert, this kind of makes the center a little bit neater also. So now that I have the seed pods removed from the center of the apples, I have to remove a little bit of the stem. So I just take my paring knife and just kind of do a simple U motion, and that will remove the top and the bottom of the apple. Some people like to do this ahead of time. It really kind of depends on how you want to do it. This seems to work best for me, but everybody's different. Everybody has their own technique. You do what you want to do. Missed that one. Now we're going to be slicing these apples up for an apple pie. When you're making any type of dessert where you're actually going to be cooking the apples like we're going to be doing today, it's always a good idea to slice the apples in a nice consistent thickness. That way they cook as evenly as they can. They're not going to have one part of the apple being really hard and the other part of the apple being very soft or not quite cooked. So to slice the apples, I like to just put them flat on the cutting board, and doing the same technique that you would do in the kitchen. If you just take the knife and keep the point down, pull the knife straight back, it doesn't move. You've got some nice slices. There you have it. All our apples nice and sliced, ready to be baked.
Okay, so now I'm going to roll out the puff pastry for the tart. This is a puff pastry I made for you the other day. It was half a recipe, so it's straight out of the refrigerator, so it's going to give me just a little bit of resistance, but not a lot. I'm going to roll this up to about a 1/4 of an inch. And as it warms up, I'm going to put a little bit of flour down on the table. Almost there. I want to leave it a little thicker than normal because it's going to have to support the weight of both the apples and the caramel. So you don't want to go too thin with this. I know that everybody really wants to go really thin. 1/8 to a 1/4 of an inch. Certainly don't want to be able to read that newspaper through it. So I've just taken a plate, which is about the same size, just maybe a little bit larger than my skillet that I'm going to cook my apples in. And with the back side of my knife, since I am working on a wooden table, I'm just going to cut around the outside. Okay, and there's my puff pastry for my tart. Okay, so I have my saute pan. I want something that is able to go into the oven because that's where it's going to end up. I've got my butter. I've got 3 ounces of butter here, and I'm just going to let that melt in the pan real quick. Once the sugar is in, please don't stir it anymore, but you can kind of help the butter along. Then I have 8 ounces of sugar to introduce to that melted butter. Once it all melts nice and gotta love the smell of butter melting. Now I have this on about medium to medium high heat. And then I'm going to sprinkle my sugar in. I know I said don't stir it, but you can stir it up until the point that it starts to liquefy. Make sure that that butter gets all the way through that sugar. Now I'm going to leave the recipe just a little bit for a second. I like to add a little bit of flavoring to it. Traditionally it does not have any flavoring, but I'm going to sprinkle just a little bit of cinnamon on my sugar. Kind of making a cinnamon caramel. And now that my sugar is almost liquefied, I'm going to start introducing the apples here in just a second. Now I quartered my apples, so I'm going to just come through and set my apples down. All the way around. Be careful, don't put your fingers down into the sugar. Sugar is hot, will cling to your skin, and worst burn ever. And I'm going to just, over about a medium heat, I'm going to allow that to cook for about 10 minutes. And we'll come back. Okay, so it's been probably about 3 minutes. Don't worry too much about your caramel. The apples are beginning to give off some juice, so that's going to kind of slow down the caramelization of your sugar. Because basically what you're waiting for to happen when you're caramelizing sugar is all the excess liquid to evaporate. Okay, so I have taken the puff pastry and I put it on top of the apples. After turning my stove off, I then tucked the puff pastry on the inside of the pan. I'm trying to create a bowl to contain the apples and the caramel when I go to invert it. And then once I get the puff pastry tucked in, I want to just run my spatula around the outside to kind of make sure that I am tucked all the way around and it's nice and even. And now it's time to put this into the oven. I have pulled the Tarte Tatin out of the oven now. The book recommends that you bake the tart for 30 to 40 minutes in a 425-degree oven. I personally think that perhaps baking it in a 375 oven for 45, 50-ish type minutes will yield a better product. Since the puff pastry is so thick, this will allow the inside of the pastry to bake before the outside of the pastry browns too much. As you can tell, I've burnt the outside just a little bit. Some of that is the caramelized sugar. As the puff pastry started to rise, it kind of was on the outside. But it's really, really hot right now, so I'm going to let it sit for about 10 minutes before I try to turn this out, because if I don't, I'm going to end up with a really nasty burn. So I'm going to set the timer, and we'll revisit it in 10. Okay, so our timer's about ready to go off, and it looks like our butter has started solidifying our caramel sauce. So I'm going to take a plate and I'm going to invert it, but it's still rather hot, so please be careful when you're turning this over. Uh, Let me grab the plate real quick, and first I want to turn this or run a spatula around the outside. And I want to loosen anything that might have possibly baked to the side of the pan. And I'm just going to simply put the plate right on top. And then I'm going to grab a couple of hot pads real quick because, quite frankly, I do not want to burn myself. And you're going to have to be rather quick about this. This is no piddling around. One more. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over really fast. Here we go. Okay, and just remove the pan. Hopefully nothing sticks. And look, doesn't that look beautiful? Okay, it is a little liquidy on top right now, but as it sits, the butter ought to start solidifying a little bit and reset that